Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my crazy neighbor demands I give his entitled son my classic car. I refuse to do so and he ends up setting my car on fire and hurting my pet in the process. Here is what happened, let's dive right into the story. The first one starts like this. You could hear a lot about the depths of a parent's love, but this is one of those things a person only truly understands when they are in that position. So, when my wife and I had our son, I learned the real meaning of responsibility and love. My small family, consisting of my wife, my son and my dog, meant the world to me. That being said, it's baffling how this expression takes different forms with different people. My neighbor, who lives right next door, also had a son just 2 months after me. He was an odd man. He was what I would like to call a Ken, the term we use to describe what most people would call a Karen, but the only difference was that he was a man. I had never come across anyone as entitled as him. He moved in a few years before his son was born, and apparently he was a descendant of someone from a royal family. So therefore he expected everyone to know this bit of information and treat him like a royalty. His son grew up to be just as obnoxious as a result of his spoiled upbringing. I did not like my son hanging out with someone as entitled as Ken's son, but fortunately, my son did not like their family either. I raised him with values of hard work and made sure that he learned that things have to be earned. One of my most prized possessions is my 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle Z16. And regardless of how many times he asked to drive it, he was not allowed to until he got his license. Besides, the car was easily worth $250k, and I was not about to let anyone use it to learn to drive. Ken had a habit of parking his cars in front of my house, even though there was ample parking space in front of his own house. Whenever I confronted him about it, he would shrug it off and say that his car was old and dented now, so he would rather not have that in front of his house. This caused a lot of inconvenience for me and my family, especially when we had guests over. Ken also had a tendency to host loud parties at odd hours of the night, disturbing the peace and quiet of the entire neighborhood. Despite repeated requests from his neighbors, he refused to tone down the noise level, claiming that it was his right to party on his property. The worst part was that his friends would be a menace when they got drunk. They'd try pretending like they are still young way too often and pull pranks in the middle of the night. Most of these parties usually ended up with a couple of them throwing up on the lawns of other neighbors or causing damage to their property. During one of the parties, a friend of his crashed into my mailbox as well. Ken's son was no better. When the kids were younger, he had a habit of sneaking into my yard and playing with my son's toys without permission. When I confronted Ken about it, he got defensive and claimed that my son should be more generous and share his toys with his son. The man refused to listen to me when I tried explaining how we would not mind sharing at all, but the problem is that Ken's son never asked or even told us that he was over. Additionally, Ken would often make unreasonable demands on his neighbors, like asking them to mow his lawn or clean his gutters without offering anything in return. He had a habit of borrowing tools and not returning them, leaving his neighbors in a lurch. All these incidents showed that Ken had a sense of entitlement and a lack of consideration for others. His behavior had a negative impact on the entire neighborhood and many of his neighbors started avoiding him altogether. However, none of us could have predicted the extreme length to which he would go to get what he wanted when it was something his son demanded. Despite our differences, Ken and I were able to maintain a cordial relationship for the most part. I made it a point to keep my distance and not engage unless it was absolutely necessary. That was until his son's high school graduation day and birthday were approaching and he decided to turn my life upside down. Ken knocked on my door and requested that I gift my classic car to his son as a combined present. He explained that his son had been looking forward to driving it for years and that it would make his special day even more memorable. I was taken aback by Ken's request and declined politely, explaining that the car was my prized possession and that I couldn't possibly part with it. But Ken did not take no for an answer. He began to demand that I give him the car and called me selfish for not thinking about the happiness of his son. I refused to engage in an argument and simply shut the door. I should have known that he wouldn't give up that easily. As I was coming back from my walk the following evening, I noticed a strange smell coming from my garage. I quickly realized that it was the smell of smoke and my heart sank as I realized what was happening. I ran towards my garage and saw flames shooting out of the windows. My beloved 1965 Chevrolet Chevelle Z16 was engulfed in flames. And I felt my heart break as I watched it burn. The fire department arrived on the scene soon after, but it was too late to save the car. It had been completely destroyed by the fire, leaving only a charred shell. I was in shock and could not believe what had just happened. My car was more than just a vehicle to me, it was a symbol of my hard work and dedication, and it held a special place in my heart. As I stood there trying to process what had happened, I saw Ken and his son standing at the edge of my property. Ken was smirking and his son was giggling as if they found the whole situation amusing. My anger boiled over and I charged towards them, demanding to know what had happened. Ken just shrugged and said, "Your car was in the way of my son's future. He needed it more than you did." I could not believe what I was hearing. I was furious and felt helpless as I watched the flames consume my car. The firefighters were able to put out the fire, but the damage was done. The car was a total loss and I was left with nothing but ashes and memories. As if this was not bad enough, I then noticed my dog passed out by the car. I ran over to his limp body and checked for a pulse. It was faint, but thankfully he was still breathing. He had a habit of sleeping under the car and I assumed that must have been where he was during the fire. I was terrified for his life and rushed over to the nearest vet. They said he would survive, but I was now even more furious. I had a strong suspicion that Ken was behind the fire, there was no doubt about it. I called the police and filed the report. After they went through the security camera footage on the street, they had actual evidence of Ken committing the crime. They arrested him and he eventually confessed to setting my car on fire. It turned out that he was so infuriated by my refusal to give him my car that he decided to take matters into his own hands. Ken was charged with arson and endangering the life of an animal and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Additionally, he had to pay compensation for the car, and considering the fact that it was a classic car, the amount he had to pay was ridiculously huge. It was a tough lesson to learn, but I realized that some people cannot be reasoned with no matter how much you try. I also learned the importance of standing up for myself and my possessions, especially when it comes to dealing with entitled people like Ken. From that day forward, I made sure to take extra precautions to protect myself and my family. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it seems like if you have an expensive classic cars, you need to be careful with your neighbors. If they are the jealous kind, they might really try some shenanigans to mess with you and your car. Either way, if you like these stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment if you want to support me. Thank you so much. The next one is titled Bank Revenge. We lived in another country for a few years and opened an account with a major bank to get pay bills, etc. Sure, we kept a few home country accounts open with some money in them because we thought we would eventually move back, but we used a major bank account for mostly everything. We eventually moved back to our home country, but kept the major bank account open for a few months to make sure all our outstanding bills were paid and to wait to convert all our foreign currency to home currency at a better exchange rate than where the foreign currency was languishing at the time. After the eventual currency exchange and repatriation to our home country accounts, my wife tried to close the account, but major bank insisted that we could only do so in person. This is problematic because we now live very far away, thousands upon thousands of kilometers, and well, you could also appear in person at our overseas branch located in major city. Oh sure, that would only take us 2 days to drive, hundreds in gas, and an overnight stay in a hotel in major city at hundreds per night to appear in person. Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe we'll fly and get it all done in one day for the low price of nearly 1,000. For reasons not entirely clear to me, when we transferred the money from major bank to the currency exchange company, we ended up with the equivalent of 75 cents left in the major bank accounts. So, since we're not willing to spend hundreds or thousands to recover a few cents, we just didn't close the account. The 75 cents are still there are no fees or anything that we can see on our statements that they paper mail to us half a world away every month and have for years. I mean, I could probably go paperless, but it seems I have forgotten my password by now on this account I never use. And the next one is titled American Language. I am an American that was born and raised in the South. It's an obvious dialect. Also, English is a second language for most people here. Language barriers are not uncommon. All of this comes into the revenge. So, years ago, I worked in a call center. It was a large company with English and Spanish departments. I worked in the English department but sat next to our Spanish department. I handled billing. No one calls billing in a good mood, but in general they are angry with the company, not the rep. You calm them down, fix the issue, and you're off to the next call. Few customers are memorable, but this one I'll never forget and I still laugh. So this call happened on a busy day with long wait times. This just made the revenge sweeter. The call went like this. Me, thank you for calling. Lady, I want an American on the phone. Me, what? Lady, I said I want an American on the phone. Me, ma'am, I am an American. Lady, I want an American on the phone. At this point, I can only assume I'm not speaking the right language. Me, un momento por favor. I put her on hold, transfer her over to the Spanish line and just giggled to myself. But it didn't end there. The lines were starting to calm down and I was chatting with one of the Spanish reps when his deskmate pops up and says that she's got a psycho on the phone. It was the woman I had transferred. She was going ballistic. The Spanish rep had her on mute while talking to us. I apologized and told her what happened. She started laughing, then looks right at me and said, I'm gonna put her back in the Spanish queue. The Spanish department had a blast laughing at this crazy Karen as they kept putting her back in the queue. I don't know if she ever got her issue fixed, but then again, we never found out what the issue was either. She was too busy yelling at everyone. Moral of the story, be nice to phone reps. The next story is titled, Called Out My Dumb Neighbor. I moved into an apartment on the ground floor of a house which is split up into 3 apartments. The house next door is owned by a couple with several kids. The woman who lives there has a temper. A few times when I've been hanging out with friends in the backyard, she has yelled at us over stuff. Playing music with cusses where her kids can hear, being too slutty with each other, which was awkward because we are not doing anything sexual, other stuff that's too ugly to repeat here. As far as I can tell, she never does this in front of her husband or kids. Her husband is not home often, it seems. Then, a while later, I was out getting my mail when 4 people walked by. The neighbor lady, her husband and 2 older people, who I think were either her parents or her husband's parents. The husband asked me if I knew there was water leaking from the hose in the front yard of my house. He seemed friendly, like he was trying to be helpful. I said I hadn't known, maybe the maintenance guy left it on. But then I got a really weird feeling about how the woman that has said so much nasty stuff was standing with her family acting really chill in front of them. I said, hey, excuse me, aren't you the lady who's called my friends and I sloots, homophobic slur, and C-words? I was hoping to talk to you at a calmer moment. She said no right away. I then, knowing full well that she was that lady, said, oh sorry, perhaps I'm confused. There's a lady who lives in that house, mid-40s, heavy-set with chin-length brown hair, smokes out back every night, who has said all those things and more, and I really don't appreciate it. Do you have a sister or a roommate? She cut me off and said maybe it's better I leave, and so I did. I heard fighting from that house that night, and I think it was because of what I said. Her husband and the older couple seemed shocked by some of it. So Reddit, am I the jerk for calling my neighbor out in front of her family? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for calling out her neighbor in front of her family or not? I've tried to talk to her one-on-one about 4 times and she has never been receptive or ready to calm down enough to listen. I wish I could have had a productive talk before this, but I really was not getting anywhere. Comment number 1, not the a-hole. Honestly, I think it's good that you put her in her place. If she wasn't being respectful or receptive, then that's on her. Doing it in front of her family is probably the only way she would have listened. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. You already tried to talk to her privately, which did not work, and the way you said all this was indirect and pretty polite. You did not go off at her, but just asked a question. So she is now facing the consequences. Perhaps you should get a camera to record your next interaction, something like a security camera. And the next one is titled, Am I the jerk for working against my father? So I have a father who left our family to start a new one with our neighbor when I was 13. I never fully forgave him, even though he tried and still does to make it up to me. Growing up, he would pay me to work with him in his company. It's pretty advanced construction finishing stuff like custom molding for many different uses. I worked with him on and off through college and I've gotten very good at it. He asked me to join his company full-time as an equal owner after I graduated. But my stepmom had a fit and basically forced my stepbrother into the mix as well. I don't get along with my stepbrother and told my father that it's either him or me. He also did not have the right skills to work in a major capacity. To no one's surprise, my father said I needed to compromise so everyone in the family can be happy. I refused to compromise and went ahead and set up my own company. My father was upset, but I guess he figured he couldn't stop me. So we continued having weekly dinners. For some reason, people are liking my company's work more than his. I have expanded my company more than my father ever has. And I also targeted his major clients who have slowly come over to my company. I don't even do any of the labor myself anymore unless I want to. Last week my father broke down and said his business was struggling to survive. I admit I did feel bad, so I offered him a full-time job in my company and that I would buy out his tools and workshop lease. But I told him my stepmother and stepbrother are not welcome anywhere near my company. This made my father pretty angry and we had a pretty big fight. He said I betrayed him and then I basically told him he betrayed me by cheating on my mother. I do feel kind of guilty. I ruined my father's company he worked hard to build, but at the same time, he forced me into this position by getting his family involved. Yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for basically building a better company than his dad and taking his clients, or not? Let me know in the comments. And a user in the comments said, not the a-hole, this is how it works with competing businesses, whether you're family or not. Plus, if your family chose his family over you, then you have no obligation to choose them over yourself. It takes a big man to offer him a job in the first place. Hopefully, you guys can work it out. Comment number 2. You are the a-hole. Your dad's cheating and leaving, clearly the a-hole, and trying to give equal opportunities to his 2 sons, no a-holes there, are separate issues. If your dad was some POS, I would say it was all justified, but that's not the kind of man you have described here. You are not the a-hole for starting your own company, being really good at what you do, or for making your dad an offer, but you are the a-hole for targeting his bigger clients and for casting yourself as a victim forced into his position. You could have sat back and let your father's work dry up on its own, but that was not enough. You were ruthless, so you win, I guess. And the next one is titled, Karen gets absolutely enraged when I teach her a lesson. A few years ago, I was on a flight from London to Sydney when an older woman, maybe 70, suddenly collapsed in the aisle. The flight attendants rush over to her and check her pulse and determine she doesn't have one and commence CPR. People are standing up to see what is happening and a few people start to film. At this point, the flight crew brought out a defibrillator and have had to remove the dying woman's shirt to use it on her. Myself and a few other people tried to stand around and them to block the view and give the poor woman some dignity in this horrible moment. The flight crew are naturally panicking but remaining professional. One flight attendant is asking people to stop filming, but they don't. The closest person to me was Karen and she had her phone moving at all angles to try and get some footage of the poor woman on the floor. I snatched her phone out of her hands and called her a disrespectful Karen and she instantly started screeching that I had stolen her phone. The flight attendants were not paying attention to what she was saying, as they clearly had more important things to focus on. She then grabbed a flight attendant who was assisting with first aid by the arm and told them I had stolen her phone. I did not want to cause more drama for the poor flight attendant who was so flustered, so I threw her phone down on her seat. The lady collapsed shortly before we landed, so once we had landed, we all had to wait on the plane while the ambulance crew boarded and commanded CPR and eventually took her off the flight. While we were waiting, Karen said, "Can we get off the plane? I want to go home. I've had a long flight and I'm tired." Luckily for me, someone else was sick of her BS because they told her to shove her complaints up her butt. I wish I had thrown her phone out of the plane if I could have. And the next one is titled, Child Support Revenge After Many Years. My parents divorced many moons ago. The children were 5, 4, me and 2 years old at the time. My father didn't want to pay his child support through the courthouse because of the man, and he didn't want any of his child support to be accessible to my mother. He would pay sporadically or not at all when we were growing up. Now, child support for 3 kids back in the day amounted to around $150 a month. She reported him to the state and we moved on with our lives, including a wonderful stepdad who took all of us on as his own. A few years ago, my biological father applied for Social Security. He had successfully avoided collections by working for himself and dodging collections. The state I lived in started to garnish money out of his SS payment. My mother does a happy dance every month knowing that she is getting the ultimate petty revenge for all those years she struggled to raise us without his support. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.